Hi everybody, welcome to tonight. My name's John Hare. I'm the president of the board of the Battle of Homestead Foundation, and we are super pleased to develop what I hope is going to be a growing partnership and relationship with our friends at the Homestead Cemetery. And tonight we're going to find out a lot about who is there in the cemetery and why it's important for us to remember those who have gone before us. The Battle of Homestead exists as a nonprofit organization founded officially in 1992, and is composed of over 200 members who are interested in exploring what has come before, particularly in this industrial valley. And tonight we are meeting in one of the few surviving buildings from 1892, which was in July, the Battle of Homestead. This building served as the conveyor of water from the river to the mill. And if you haven't had the opportunity to walk around and read some of the explanatory material, you should. We consider this sacred ground because here, this very site was where on July the 6th, 1892, the owners of the Carnegie Steel Mill, Andrew Carnegie and his first lieutenant, Henry Clay Frick, decided that they would have a lockout of the employees over the contract bargaining. The employees did have a contract, the union existed. They successfully have managed to have some of the highest wage standards and working practices among the various mills in the Mon Valley. And they were very proud of their union. And they did not take kindly in the bargaining to be told, either you take our wage cut offer or you can't work for us. People are surprised to learn that with that lockout came the building of a 12-foot high fence around the mill, around several miles of the mill. It actually was strung with some of the first electric current that existed in the world. And in those wooden fences were windows sufficient for rifles to be pointed out to make sure that anyone who wanted to breach the walls might be shot. So the workers were in no mood to settle. And in 1892, they were especially agitated, as well as the townspeople were, because their intelligence network up and down the river had announced that they had seen two barges on their way down the river, coming through Pittsburgh and through Homestead, and that the barges had 400 armed detectives hired by the Pinkerton Agency to come to Homestead to set up guard and to assure that non-union hires would be able to run the mill rather than the locked out employees. So there was a significant struggle here, and it's much too complicated to discuss tonight, but it is important because Homestead, among several other historic strikes in our country really are watershed events that help to shape labor relations and how people were recruited to be hired, what kind of conditions they worked under, and whether or not the employers felt that they had an absolute right to hire and fire people at will. That became the standard because eventually the strike was overcome. And the main factor there was that on the day of July of the Battle of Homestead, over 1,000, and really a few thousand of employees and townspeople together repelled these armed detectives. Shots were fired both ways, and 7 workers and townspeople were shot, and several Pinkerton detectives were shot and died. And eventually, because the Pinkertons were essentially cooped up in their barges, they couldn't get out, they waved the white flag, and the Union supervised their safe passage out of town. However, they had to walk through a gauntlet of angry people, and many of them suffered the consequences of that through the angry people saying that they were desecrating the flag, which gives all workers a property right to have their jobs if they're doing their job and earning a profit or earning a good production for the employer. Now, many of those 7 workers and townspeople, in fact, 7 are in fact buried in the Homestead Cemetery. And we are so pleased that the cemetery has an active and important management and volunteer base to begin to do what is so important, and that is to find ways to tell the stories of those who came before us. Because many of the stories we read are not the stories of people who are here in the ground. They may be the stories of the industrialists, they may be the stories of people who want to believe that these things didn't happen. But we in the Battle of Homestead and many others are dedicated to tell a people's history and to utilize the things that we learn from talking to people, hearing their stories, uncovering information, dealing with the archival materials that can show how people lived, what people were concerned about, what working people made, what they were unable to make, and how many died in the process of going to work. That is an important thing, and we're so glad that we have friends like the management of the cemetery who is interested as well in having these stories told. So I'm very pleased to first ask you to check out some of the literature of the Battle of Homestead Foundation. If you like labor history, if you like to learn about what really our grandfathers and grandmothers did when they came over from other places to live here and to work here. If you're interested in that, sign up and get on our mailing list. We have a variety of programs that we work with. So I'm very pleased tonight to introduce Kira Mangold and Russ Firestone. They're going to talk to us about the cemetery. They're going to talk to us about what we can do to build the stories that lie underground now, and how can we celebrate these stories. And for our board at the Battle of Homestead, we are so interested in developing ties within the community. It's been our goal to establish an actual center for the history of labor and the future of work, a center that would have an ongoing relationship, education with education institutions, cultural events to celebrate our history, and more important, to raise the pride and dignity of people that work every day and the sacrifices that they've made. And frankly, begin the dialogue that is going on today, because you can't know where we're going, where our economy is going, where our society is going, unless we know where we've been. And that is also our mission, to be able to begin that dialogue of what we can do to make sure that working people and communities will not suffer because of, frankly, corporate greed. So, welcome aboard, Russ and Kira. They're going to talk to us about the cemetery, and we'll talk to you all later. Thank you.
You'll have to forgive me, I have to read nowadays. So good evening, my name is Russ Firestone. I am the president of the Homestead Cemetery Company. We're humbled, honored, and grateful to the Battle of Homestead Foundation for providing us with this opportunity to share our story. In 2015, the Homestead Cemetery declared bankruptcy. The gates were changed, the grounds were abandoned and left to completely deteriorate. Our board was formed in 2020. We're a group of committed volunteers who set out on a mission to ensure that the cemetery returned to its former glory. Always at the foremost of our thoughts, as well as actions, has been to ensure that we provide the souls entrusted to our care, as well as the community, that their loved ones would be treated with dignity and respect. In our 4 years, we've accomplished much, with more still to come. We've refurbished, restored, and rededicated the Soldier Circle area. We've updated all of our equipment. We've reimagined the caretaker's old residence as office space, a records repository, a sales office, and we are currently putting the finishing touches on a chapel which we will dedicate this November. These successes are due in large part due to partnerships we've formed with the Steelworkers Union, local trade unions representing the carpenters, the finishers, painters, and the bricklayers unions. We also have been assisted by our local Cub, Boy, and Girl Scouts troops. They have partnered with the University of Pittsburgh for assistance in updating our records and mapping out the cemetery. We have also partnered with the county's OVR program to assist in the maintenance of the grounds. We've succeeded in returning the cemetery into a fully functioning operation. We're conducting burials. We've opened a new section with over 250 burial plots for sale. We've acquired additional property that will afford us future expansion. We've created a perpetual care fund that will help to ensure that the events like 2015 never happen again. We've created a fundraising arm known as the Friends of the Homestead Cemetery. This organization, which is a 501c3, is charged with fundraising, community partnerships, educational opportunities, as well as grant opportunities. This will provide future stability of the cemetery moving forward. Our focus this year has been on community outreach. We've done numerous presentations throughout the community. We've also conducted our second successful History Day, which provided walking tours which highlighted the Soldier Circle, the Steel Strikers, baseball players, prominent African Americans, the destruction of the ward, and a genealogical service called Finding Deep Roots. It's now that I'm very proud to introduce Kara Mangold, our board secretary, and she's going to share with you tonight the stories behind the stones.
So my name is Kira. Some of you may recognize me from the Zabolskis Funeral Home, where I'm one of the funeral directors as well. My boss and other of my coworkers suckered me into joining the board back in 2020. Rusty had actually been one of my high school history teachers. So I really got suckered into helping out. I've had a really, really good time doing this, so it's kind of become a passion project of ours. I do want to introduce also a couple of our other volunteers, David Hrushka and Kim Farah. So they are board members on the fundraising side of things. So if you have money, talk to them. Okay, so without further ado, I do recognize a few faces here tonight from our second annual History Day. I see a t-shirt, so thank you for supporting us. Thank you for joining us as we toured the grounds, and we learned a lot of really interesting stuff about some of the notables that lie with us. We're honored to have John Morris, Joseph Sotak, and Silas Wayne, who are three of the steel workers that were killed in the Battle of Homestead, rest within our grounds. And at this rate, you know their stories better than I could ever tell you. So we wanted to acknowledge their presence here tonight in this meaningful place, yet take some time to introduce you to other residents of the cemetery that you might not be as familiar with. So this month, the cemetery is observing its 138th year. As we've spent time researching the folks who reside within our hallowed grounds, we've quickly realized that we are more than a cemetery. We're a repository for local history. The members of our community who rest peacefully within the grounds have shaped the neighboring boroughs in unimaginable ways, with their military service, businesses, politics, art, music, and athletic prowess. Each of the stones you see at the Homestead Cemetery is a representation of the person that they mark, and each of those people had a life. They had a story. We're so pleased to share some of those stories with you tonight. I'd like to start with this gentleman named Abdiel McClure. He, along with his wife, Anne Wiles Risher, inherited the Amity homestead following the deaths of his father and grandfather, who had originally purchased this land in 1786. Their land was generally bounded by Ann Street, East 12th Avenue, McClure Street, and the riverfront. Their modest residence, which is shown here, was built by Abdiel's grandfather, John McClure, and originally stood between East 9th and 10th Avenues with a large lawn fronting 8th Avenue. In the 1850s, Abdiel and his family organized a land title company with other early landowners in the area and began to subdivide their large properties. A portion of his land, roughly 150 acres in size, was sold to the city of Pittsburgh to use towards the construction of the city's pork farm. In 1871, Abdiel, who's already a pretty wealthy guy, if you couldn't tell, further parceled and subdivided another 113 acres of his Amity homestead into 60 by 120-foot lots that were sold through his business, the Homestead Bank and Life Insurance Company. If you haven't picked up, that's why this place is called Homestead. So the bank marketed the area as a peaceful suburban community for families looking to escape the polluted downtown hustle and bustle. And that was actually a tagline from his ad in the papers. So this was his official plan for his subdivisions. So he kept a larger parcel up for himself, where he built a lumber planing mill in anticipation of this engineered construction boom. But he set aside additional lots to be used specifically for schools and churches, which is why we have so many of them at Homestead. So within 2 short years, hundreds of homes were built until the panic of 1873 halted residential progress. By the end of that decade, less than 600 inhabitants resided in Homestead. So this coincidentally left large tracts of land available for the mills and factories to open and expand over the next decades. So you can see that giant, move that one real quick. Yep. You can see that big rectangle in the middle, that was their estate, okay? So they've split their property already. And to put this all into the visual perspective, this is 1886 plan depicts Homestead the year before Abiel's death. So their residence is, look, there, right there, okay. And one more click. Okay, so within 15 years, the area exploded. This plan is from 1900, and their home remained right where the arrow is. So you can see how everything had really changed over that time. So this picture was taken in 1915 of their manor. It was ultimately razed in the early 1930s, and the lot is currently occupied by the St. Nicholas Russian Orthodox Church, which was built in 1938. So Abdiel and his immediate family now reside in the largest family lot in the cemetery, at the crest of the hill which overlooks their family's homestead that had stood for over 100 years prior.
Is that shaking because of the train?
Oh,
That's awesome. That's just awesome.
it's part of the fun. So Lowry Hay West, he was the first president of the Homestead Cemetery. And the Wests were one of the pioneer Irish families of Mifflin Township, and they generally were really big and very well connected through marriages that bonded the Hays, the Whitakers, a lot of the big names of this area together. They had several manufacturing businesses and were really prominent real estate holders in the area. He and his wife, Eliza J. Snyder, were also very distinguished members of the Presbyterian Church. And they founded the first Homestead Presbyterian Church on the corner of 9th and Ann Street with none other than Abdiel McClure. So that happened in 1873. So the current church still stands where it was originally dedicated, and it was right across the street from the McClure's estate. So Lowry was also a pretty substantial businessman with a true knack for real estate. He was very, very well regarded in this area, constantly, quote, exerting his influence always on the side of right and justice, according to a century and a half of Pittsburgh and her people. And that was still Pittsburgh without the H, so you know that's pretty old. He was one of 10 children of Joseph West and Sarah Whitaker. He, along with 3 of his brothers, inherited the farm from their parents, and they worked the land until a portion was purchased by the Homestead Bank. So this map from 1886 shows their farm, which eventually became a portion of West Homestead along with Calhoun's land, now known as Calhoun Village and West Homestead. So we aren't very original when we're naming these areas' names. But for reference, Homestead Cemetery would eventually go where that second arrow is. So why is this important for us at the cemetery? And at this point, you've seen Homestead is growing, and it is growing fast. Mills are expanding, businesses are popping up everywhere to accommodate supplies for the mills as well as the burgeoning population. The place is absolutely booming. There are now a lot of extra people in town. There's a surge in births, as well as deaths. The Homestead Cemetery was founded in 1886 by Lowry H. West, his son, Northwest. Kim Kardashian is not that original. John F. Cox, Samuel G. West, who was Lowry's paternal first cousin, and C.P. Sipe on land that belonged to members of the West family, mainly Samuel. As the area grew in population, thanks to the industrial boom, the necessity for a public burial ground adequate to the growing wants of the community had for some time demanded the establishing of a cemetery in the vicinity of Homestead. The charter established the cemetery as a first-class, non-profit cemetery, free from any bias of sect or creed, where loved ones could sleep away the rolling years in a peaceful and undisturbed repose. Samuel, who ended up becoming the first superintendent of the cemetery, proposed to sell about 38 acres of his land that was situated a half-mile south of the borough of Homestead. This property would be adjacent to the Franklin Methodist Episcopal Church, now known as Ann Ashley on 22nd Avenue. According to Samuel, a lovelier, more desirable, and more appropriate location could not be found in all of the country. The sale went forward on October 5th of 1886 for $64,550. Graves were originally sold for $5 for an adult space and $3 for a child-sized space. The opening and closing fees were roughly $4 and $2.50 respectively, so things have changed just a little bit. As an aside, we are very, very fortunate to have an original charter, copy of the original charter rather, which was first published in October of 1886. So if you are interested in reading that 29-page document, you can find that on our website. So an interesting follow-up we found during the initial research was Robert G. West was Samuel's brother. He filed a claim against the cemetery in 1889. The company had purchased a little over 4 acres from Robert to be used in the cemetery, along with the acreage from Samuel. About $80,000 in bonds had been split between the property holders. Robert claimed that over $60,000 of those bonds were bunk. He received about $4,200. He alleged that the remaining land wasn't worth over $20,000. He further accused the Wests of creating fictitious bonds worth over $25,000 and of inflating the price of the land just to get more money. So ultimately, the members of the board had to give back the money or cancel the bonds. That was just kind of an interesting thing to find. But the grounds were officially dedicated on Memorial Day, or Dedication Day of 1887. So the Honorable John Cox acted as the Master of Ceremonies, and Burgess Jones of Homestead made dedicatory speeches. Afterwards, Mr. Sept, who was the 5th Homestead Board member, presented a gifted deed for 60 square foot lot to the General Charles Griffin, Post 207, Grand Army of the Republic, for the purpose of interring and honoring war veterans. So this is where the Soldier Circle currently sits. The circle now holds 43 graves of veterans that fought in the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, and World Wars I and II. And if you'd like to learn more about the veterans buried in the circle, you can pick up a copy of our new book, The Eternal Watch, The Legacy of Homestead Cemetery's Soldier Circle. We have a few copies here, or you can get it on Amazon at your convenience. So soon after the dedication of the lot, Post 207 established a committee to raise funds for the Union Veterans Monument to be placed within the center. And their first meeting was held in January of 1889. Within a year, bids were accepted of mock-up designs, and the winning design, you can see here, was created by Rainsthorpe Engineering. The final foundry bid was awarded to Frederick and Field of Quincy, Massachusetts in November of 1890, with the expectation that the monument would be installed by June of the following year. The statue was estimated at $2,500, which is nearly $77,000 today. And Post 207 worked for years to lessen the debt with fundraisers and other events. The completed bronze statue was affixed to its granite base on September 17th of 1891 in a grand display following a 2-mile parade through Homestead. The papers estimated nearly half of the 10,000 population was present for the dedication. And a full history provided by Linda and John Asmonga can be found on our website, as well as in the Eternal Watch book.
Who did you say made the statue?
Rainsthorpe Engineering had designed it, and it was Frederick and Field of Quincy, Massachusetts, that actually founded the statue. But the Asmonga research included this photo from the dedication. And one of the men they were able to identify was Joseph Bennett with his drum. He's the gentleman that the arrow is pointing to. So Joseph was the son of a career soldier. According to his obituary, when the Civil War broke out, Joseph's father volunteered for duty. Joseph ran away to follow him and enlisted on October of 1861 in Johnstown. He was 11 years old. He was set to serve for 3 years as a drummer in the U.S. Infantry. His regiment was assigned under General Grant, and Joseph was sent to many battles, including Shiloh, Corinth, Perryville, and Stone River. He was discharged on, December 15th of 1862 at the ripe age of 12. He re-enlisted the following June as a bugler to serve 6 months in Company F of the PA Volunteer Cavalry. He was discharged at the end of his contract and re-enlisted again to the same company and regiment, this time for 3 years. So he served in several battles throughout Virginia and West Virginia until the war ended. He died at the age of 73 in his Amity Street home in Homestead on January 30th of 1924. His cause of death was listed as pneumonia caused by a very rapid engorgement of the lungs following taking a cold. So he is buried within the soldier circle. This photo was taken on the steps of the Carnegie Library in Homestead in 1906. And these were some of the original members of Post 207. You can see Mr. Bennett here. And one of the other few gentlemen we were able to identify is Levius B. Hirsch. So Levius Hirsch was born in Irwin on May 12th of 1837 as the eldest of 6 kids. He worked as a coal miner and mill laborer throughout his life. He lived for more than 40 years in Homestead. He had enlisted as an Army corporal at the onset of the Civil War, and he belonged to several units throughout his time in the military. He was present at Gettysburg. He was a devoted member of Post 207, and according to his obituary, he had met with fellow members of the post the previous evening to practice arrangements for the Memorial Day services the next day. In the early morning of May 30th, he suddenly took ill at his residence on 4th Avenue in Homestead and was pronounced dead by 3 a.m. His death certificate lists cerebral meningitis due to alcoholism as the cause of death. It's noted that it was the first Memorial Day service he'd missed in a very long time, and a young boy actually alerted his post of his death just as he was about to be publicly marked absent. He's buried in Old Section C. His headstone was replaced in an ongoing project by another of our board members. So you can see the old headstone is on the left. A lot of these military headstones were totally illegible after years and years of pollution and just Pittsburgh weather. So Ellis has been going through systematically and replacing every veteran that he's able to. So I think he's done about probably close to 40 or 50 stones so far over the past few years. So he's really doing a lot of good work. So we also know who this gentleman is. So John Fremont Cox was the son of William Cox and Anna Dellenbaugh Whitaker, who had been widowed by Aaron Whitaker Jr. The Cox's farm was located in what is now Homestead Park. So John was a leading attorney and teacher, and he was an associate counsel during the steel strike. He was elected as Burgess of Homestead, and he held that position for a couple of years. He was admitted to the Allegheny County Bar in January of 1880 and practiced law for the remainder of his life. He also served as Speaker in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and championed legislative measures which regulated child labor in the mining industry, specifically prohibiting children under the age of 14 from working, period. Children between 14 and 16 were limited to 58 hours of work per week, and they required their employers to verify the age of them as well as obtain a certificate from their school that allowed them to work. He also oversaw legislation regarding automobile regulation in the U.S. So he is one of the reasons why in this state we have to register our cars and have a driver's license. So he died at 10:30 a.m. on November 6th of 1911 from renal failure in his residence on 5th Avenue in Homestead. So he now rests with his family in their lot in Old Section B. So quickly returning to our founders, Lowry's family marker is perhaps the most prominent in the old section of the cemetery. So as you enter from Main Street, you'll see a very tall obelisk standing at attention just before the Soldiers' Memorial. So as a fun fact, the obelisk actually had been a continuous piece of stone, but was shortened by about 5 feet because it kept being struck by lightning. Lowry ultimately died in November 14th of 1901 in his residence at West Street and 5th Avenue. His family was at his bedside as they had all gathered for Lowry and Eliza's golden wedding anniversary on October 30th. He became violently sick the evening before and just never recovered. So Northwest was the treasurer of the first Homestead Board. North, his wife and his young daughter rest right next to his parents. He was a prominent Johnstown businessman who got his start after opening a wholesale paper manufacturer in Pittsburgh. The business evolved into a paper-based roofing company, was purchased and relocated by the Cambria Steel Company, and was again sold to the Barrett Manufacturing Company prior to his death. And it was noted as being unusual that he had stayed as the general manager through each of those transactions. He died at the age of 58 following a short illness of paralysis. And his death certificate states the cause of death is apoplexy, which is what they called strokes back then. So Samuel, our first superintendent, was the son of Matthew Hay West and Mary Glass. Samuel's family is directly across the roadway from Lowry and North. He was 74 when he died of Bright's disease, which is now just generalized nephritis. So as the decades crept by, over 17,000 individuals would eventually join the founders within our grounds. So the Posies are really interesting people. So they were considered to be the wealthiest black family in the area, which earned their nickname the Negro Carnegies of their time. Captain Cumberland Willis Posey Sr. had been born into slavery in Port Tobacco, Maryland. Following emancipation, his father was ordained into the AME Church, and the family moved to Ohio. It was here that C.W. found work aboard a ferry. He showed such great interest in the machinations of the vessels that he eventually became an engineer assistant. By 19, he'd secured his chief engineer's license. He was the first African-American, period, to be granted that distinction. In his travels, he met Anna Stevens, who would eventually become his wife. She was reportedly the first black graduate from her Athens, Ohio high school, and she actually went on to graduate college and became a teacher. They married in 1883 and moved to Homestead shortly afterwards, eventually occupying a sizable home on East 13th Avenue in Homestead.
Is that there still?
Mm-hmm. I actually don't think that one is there still, but I'm not entirely certain. So his career blossomed with the industrial boom of the area. He opened the Diamond Coke and Coal Company, which had over 1,000 employees at its peak, making it the largest black-owned business in Pittsburgh. By the time of the steel strike, he founded and sold the Delta Coal Company to make way for his steamboat enterprise, which included 41 vessels that supplied coal and iron ore along the rivers, allowing Carnegie Steel to accumulate massive wealth. This eventually led to a partnership with Brick. He was also a 14-year president of the Pittsburgh Courier newspaper, which was an African-American newspaper, and it's actually still in print today. He was a 3-year president of the Wendy Social and Literary Club. Annie's time was spent working mostly in society, where she did a lot of charitable work for other black families around the city. According to the 1910 Negro Business Directory, she took an active interest in all movements tending to the advancement of the race, so she was very forward-thinking for her time. She was also a talented and multifaceted artist and was popular contact to help decorate a lot of the wealthier estates around the area. She had hand-painted china, watercolors, oil paintings, and silk and lace pieces that people would scramble for. She would hold yearly art classes for over a decade and was a superintendent of the art department at the National Association of Colored Women's Club. So Annie died at the age of 56 on August 20th of 1917 in West Penn Hospital. She'd slipped into a 2-week coma following a cerebral apoplexy while awaiting surgery for a brain tumor. C.W. died in their residence at the age of 67 on June 5th of 1925 from chronic nephritis. You might also recognize their sons, Cumberland Jr. and Seward C. Posey. Cum was the professional basketball and baseball player most famed for his time with the Homestead Grays Negro League team. He was considered to be the best black basketball player of his time, leading the Homestead High School 1908 championship. He played in college at Penn State before transferring to Duquesne, where he worked towards a degree in pharmaceuticals. So in this area, we most recognize him for his time as a baseball player. So in 1911, he started playing for the Grays as a right-handed center fielder. The team originally had formed in 1900 as a sandlot team comprised of black teenage factory and mill workers. They were originally known as the Blue Ribbons before going semi-pro, and they changed their names to the Murdoch Grays in 1910. By 1916, Con was managing the team, and by 1920, he owned the team. He's famed with building the team into the leading East franchise of the Negro League, winning 9 consecutive pennants from 1930 until 1945. He died in Pittsburgh from cancer complications in 1946 at the age of 55 and was posthumously entered into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in 2006. Seward also played ball, but he was overshadowed by his freakishly talented brother. So he worked as the head of the front office for the Grays and helped manage the team during the 32 season. Seward died on August 24th of 1951 at the age of 63 from complications of heart disease following a fall at his family's home. He's buried in the family lot, but he's actually in an unmarked grave. The earliest death that we have recorded within the acreage is thought to be that of Hannah Cox, who died January 14th of 1849. Along with her sister, Anne Ashley, and Rebecca Ashley, they joined several others with death dates preceding our charter of the cemetery. All 3 had actually been exhumed from their initial burial spaces in Franklin Cemetery, which sits a little further down the hill from Homestead. They were taken to their new family lots after the charter was created. So Anne was one of 3 daughters. Her sister Sarah had wedded a tailor named Charles Ashley. Together they had 4 children. Sarah, along with their 4th infant, tragically died during childbirth in 1823, leaving Charles alone with their 3 young kids. Anne immediately stepped in to help raise her sister's children and ultimately became Charles' 2nd wife in September of 1827. Together with Charles, Anne had 4 of her own children. Charles sadly died a week prior to the birth of their 4th. They had been exceedingly poor, and Anne moved her family into the home of her sister Hannah. Anne's life heavily revolved around her faith. Her Presbyterian parents disowned her upon her marriage to Charles, a Methodist. Her son Alexander remembered her as being exceedingly devout and donated $400 towards the $4,000 construction of the new Methodist church to replace the old Franklin Bend church. He was honored to have the new church named after his mother, Anne Ashley, which now is on 22nd Avenue. So that church officially opened on November 13th of 1887. So Anne now rests in another big family lot with her kids and her extended family members. Rhys Evans of the North Side was born in southern Wales in 1838. He came to Pittsburgh with his family when he was 3. He was employed as a coal miner and enlisted as a private with Company B of the Pennsylvania Volunteers at the onset of the Civil War. He participated in many battles, including the Battle of the Wilderness, which was a victorless and bloody 2-day battle that took place in May of 1864 in Locust Grove, Virginia. He was captured by Confederate troops and was listed as a prisoner of war in the Spotsylvania courthouse in May of 1864. Following his capture, he was transported to the Georgia-based infamous Andersonville prison, officially known as Camp Sumter. He was confined for 11 months in overcrowded and terribly inadequate living conditions. By June, 26,000 prisoners of war were crowded into about a 26.5-acre stockade meant to hold no more than 10,000 people. It's estimated that nearly 45,000 Union prisoners of war were imprisoned there during the 14 months that the camp was operational. Nearly a third of them would die from disease, malnutrition, poor sanitation, and exposure due to overcrowding. The prison fully ceased operation in May of 1865 after it had sent most of its prisoners further south to other camps during Sherman's occupation of Atlanta. Mr. Rhys was returned to Union troops in December of 1864 and was discharged from his military service 6 days later. He's noted as attending a memorial dedication ceremony at the prison in 1905, which I can't even imagine wanting to go back there. Following his return to McKeesport, he re-entered the coal mines and was named superintendent and harbor master of the Mormont Coal Company of the North Side, where he remained for nearly 28 years. So he died in his residence on the north side on Hopkins Street on November 9th. Samuel Giffany was born in Union County, Kentucky in 1844. And he enlisted on June 2nd, 1864 in Waterford, Pennsylvania with Company B of the 45th United States Colored Infantry. His service saw several battles, and his regiment was present at the Appomattox Courthouse when General Lee surrendered to General Grant. The 45th USCI were the first African-American soldiers to march in an inaugural parade of a president. Following the war's end, his regiment was stationed in Brownsville, Texas, and he was honorably discharged that November. His obituary listed him as a considerable property owner within Haysboro, and he was a well-known minister throughout the Mon Valley. He died under tragic circumstances on October 29th of 1911 after suddenly developing mental trouble that required confinement at Woodville State Hospital in Carnegie. He is buried in the Homestead Cemetery on August 31st of 1911. His death certificate listed his cause of death as uremic coma. So unfortunately, Edwin doesn't have a headstone. We actually didn't know he was in the cemetery until his twice great-granddaughter in Texas reached out to us with a wealth of information about his life. He'd been born in Cornwall, Wales, and was the first of his family to leave for America. He arrived in New York City in April of 1869. His wife and 4 of their kids came just a couple of days after. They eventually settled in Homestead by 1880, according to the census. He opened a carpet weaving business on East 6th Avenue, later rebranding to include picture selling and framing in a new Amity Street shop that he opened. He was a very skilled artist, but he found his first true success with his iconic picture, The Great Battle of Homestead. I'm sure some of you might recognize this. The design was copyrighted in Washington, D.C. on October 11th of 1892 and was lithographed in Chicago. The lithograph hung in several important sympathetic locations throughout Homestead, including the United Steelworkers Local 1397. So the originals are still really highly valued today, selling for thousands of dollars at auction. So Edwin's son, also Edwin, worked at the Open Hearth No. 2 of the Homestead Works and witnessed firsthand the rising tensions between Carnegie and Amalgamated. It's possible that his son was the inspiration for this piece. So Edwin was a chartered member of the First Baptist Church of Homestead on 9th Avenue in McClure, and he lived within the borough until about 1917 when he moved to Squirrel Hill with his daughter. By that time, he lost his wife and 2 of his children. He died of nephritis at the age of 91 in 1925. And a full bio of his entire family can be found on our website if you're interested. His granddaughter, twice great-granddaughter, gave us quite a few family pictures as well, so it's really, really cool if you have a chance to check that out for sure. Paul Lee Birch is most known for his basketball career, and he was once called one of the finest players produced by Pittsburgh. His basketball career started in 1929 at Homestead High School, where he helped earn a Woodville title. Then he earned his All-American status at Duquesne University, where he played from 1931 until 1934. Following his graduation, he played professionally with the New York Celtics, the Pittsburgh Pirates, which was a defunct team from the National Basketball League, and the Fort Wayne Pistons, which are now located in Detroit. He'd later coach the Pistons professionally in the early 50s. So following his retirement from playing professionally, he returned to Pittsburgh to coach the city's first professional team, the Pittsburgh Ironmen, which was one of 11 charter franchises within the newly formed Basketball Association of America, which was a precursor to the NBA. So they were based in Duquesne Gardens. The Ironmen only played for 1 season in 1946. They finished dead last in the Western Division with a record of 15-45. The team permanently folded before the start of their second season. The Basketball Association of America and the National Basketball League merged to form the NBA in 1949, and it's noted that the Ironmen are reasonably considered the worst team in NBA history. Hooray. So he was a member of the Western PA and Pittsburgh Halls of Fame, and he died on June 5th of 1982 at the age of 72. Shirley Evans was an 8-year-old girl living with her parents in the Jackson Heights neighborhood of Queens, New York. She went missing after playing in neighboring vacant lots, sparking an East Coast manhunt by federal agents for a possible fiend killer, causing speculations of kidnapping, murder, and worse. Her body was discovered 3 days later, about 250 yards from her home, after a neighbor recalled the local children playing in an excavation site on the lot. It was ultimately determined that she'd been caught in a landslide after falling into a cave that the kids had dug into the earth, ultimately leading to suffocation. The contractor of the site was notified and immediately began digging. Reports claimed the men moved nearly a ton of earth by hand when her body was found slumped against a cement pad. She was noted as having been wearing a red gingham dress with a blue sailor's collar, brown shoes, and blue stockings. Her grandparents lived in Homestead, and they fought to have her join them in their family lot. Her body was returned to Homestead to be laid to rest at the insistence of the grandparents. So she and her parents are now rejoined in Old Section D of the cemetery. Earl D. Fawcett was born on February 6th of 1898. He was raised in Homestead. He began clowning at the age of 14 and continued until shortly before his death in 1969. Early in his career as a well-known Pittsburgh entertainer, he wore a red wig and checkered suit to advertise attractions, nightclubs, and theater shows. He was best known for his time as a regular member of the beloved Shrine Circus, playing as Charlie Lewis, who you see in these pictures here. He passed on December 26th of 1969 at the age of 71. Franz Natter was a German immigrant who arrived via Ellis Island in 1891. In conjunction with 5 other German bakers, he opened the Homestead Baking Company, which some of you might recognize from just over the tracks. Their capital stock totaled $50,000, which would be over $1.6 million today, which is kind of nuts to think that they had that back then as immigrants. The original bakery still stands, and it currently houses the Homestead Borough offices and police station, so their moniker is actually still on the facade. Despite its seemingly successful operation, by April of 1904, the baking company was placed into receivership because they were not able to collect outstanding debts that were owed to their creditors. So when it closed, Franz was able to buy a lot of liquidated things, and he opened his own bakery on 6th Avenue. So those are his vans that you can see there with the horse and cart. Francis Morris had been a 17-year-old resident of 17th Avenue, where he lived with his uncle and younger sister. An unusually intense electrical storm blew in that captivated the town, and many flocked outdoors to watch the impressive showing of lightning. Francis ordered his sister back into the house, while he walked further into the yard to lean against a clothesline pole. In an instant, their home was struck, tearing off the roof and opening a hole in the side of the wall. The current ran along the clothesline, down the pole, and into poor Francis. He was pronounced dead immediately. His sister Minnie was badly cut by the fallen shingles and debris, but was expected to make a full recovery. This was kind of an interesting one for us. On Thursday, December 5th of 1929, tragedy struck the Mount Hall area at 12:40 p.m. A gas blast caused the 8th Avenue Post Office, which is now roughly where DeSalvo's Pizza stands today, causing it to explode, killing 5 and wounding more than 40 others. The blast had been powerful enough to mangle and topple a streetcar, which had been on the right side of the screen, that had been parked directly outside of the storefront. Of those 5 dead was Martha Thurkel, age 37, who is on the left. She and her husband, George, who's in the middle, lived above the post office and had been chatting with a friend when the blast occurred. So George miraculously survived the initial blast and was found alive but unconscious. So following his rescue, he began frantically searching for Martha, but he'd been informed by a physician that she had died only moments prior to him regaining consciousness. After being treated at the Homestead Hospital, he told the Post-Gazette that he'd been hanging a new chandelier in the living room while his wife and their guest had been chatting in the kitchen. He stated that, quote, "Without warning, the floor seemed to drop under me with a great roar." The blast, as reported in the Post-Gazette, was said to have been caused by a leak under the building. The postmaster made mention to his superiors of noticing the gas during the morning hours, but with a 3-foot clearance, nobody wanted to go under there to check it out. As the debris was explored, it was reported that corroded pipes were the source of the leak, which ignited when it reached an open stove on the first floor. So it's estimated that the damage done to the building, its contents, and the surrounding area exceeded $100,000, which is over $1.7 million today. George survived, but he was rendered mostly deaf. A judgment in the sum of $33,000 was awarded to him from the Equitable Gas Company just months before his death in 1932 of laryngeal cancer. Anna Remus had been a resident of Wilkinsburg, and she spent her Thursday with Mrs. Jean Ross, a seamstress of 218 East 4th Avenue of Homestead, purchasing fabric for her wedding dress. She was set to marry Claude Wilson of Arthur Street in Munhall the following Tuesday. According to the newspapers, Mrs. Ross claimed that she and Anna had spent the day shopping before retiring to a Ross home. The ladies sat on the porch discussing wedding details until about 11 at night, when Anna excused herself to use the restroom. She didn't return for some time, and Mrs. Ross claimed to have thought that she might have gone right to bed, as she was staying with them over the night until the dress was done. Mrs. Ross went about her business until a boarder in her house alerted her that he had found an unresponsive Anna in the bathroom after breaking through the locked door. She had collapsed on the floor, and blood was pooling from a wound on her nose, most likely from hitting the bathtub when she lost consciousness. A doctor was immediately alerted, and after a quick examination, declared that Anna had been dead for the better part of the time since she had excused herself. Her death was attributed to heart trouble, superinduced by acute indigestion. The death certificate states the cause of death as chronic endocarditis with fatty degenerations of the heart. Her funeral arrangements were handled by Gillen and Coulter of Homestead, and the date lists her burial as June 31st of 1911, which is a date that doesn't exist. So her actual burial date was July 1st, which is recorded in our records. Correctly, I should say. But she died just 2 days before her wedding was to take place.
How old was she? Did they say how old she
She was, I think she was about 18. She was pretty young. William Smith was a Homestead police officer who was caught in a gun battle between a, quote, dope-crazed Mexican, Homestead police, county detectives, and special officers. Taglines were really something back then. The trouble started when Ernest Martinez was rejected by a young woman, and the sworn young man allegedly pulled a revolver from his waistband. Nearby authorities were alerted. Officer Smith was one of 2 police that went in pursuit when Mr. Martinez turned and fired the first shots. Smith was able to return fire, but was shot in the mouth and heart and was instantly killed. He was 35. The officer that accompanied Smith was shot through the hand and heart, but the bullet was stopped by a notebook and glasses case. He made a full recovery. The case ended after Mr. Martinez barricaded himself in the 2nd-story home where he'd been boarding. It's reported that police riddled the building full of holes with riot guns. Martinez had been struck and killed. An acquaintance of Martinez told the papers that he had been addicted to Indian hemp and developed delusions that he was being stalked by an unknown foe out for blood. So that was kind of a wild one to read. We also have a fair share of mill accidents for people that are buried. So this one was something. Harry Schweitzer had been a popular young man who lived on 8th Avenue with his aunt. At the outbreak of the Spanish-American War, he ran away from home after his dad refused consent for his enlistment, and he ultimately enlisted in Cleveland. He served with the 23rd United States Infantry. His record states that he was 21, he had light blue eyes, light brown hair, a fair complexion, and stood a little over 5'5". He was stationed in the Philippines when he had been wounded at the Battle of Parañaque when a bullet struck him in his left side, seriously wounding him. He returned home after a long stint in a field hospital, and he was discharged on August 11th of 1899 in okay condition. He'd only been fully recovered for about 2 weeks prior to his death. On the day he died, he'd been working in the 42-inch plate mill, a brand new Carnegie mill, which had been open only a week. It stated in the Pittsburgh Press coverage piece that a friend of Harry's, named Walter Nurcombe, was working nearby a rolling table when he slipped and fell. The cogwheels of the table gripped his right leg, literally grinding it off. It's reported that Nurkum retained consciousness throughout the entire ordeal, pleading for his coworkers to kill him. As the machinery was halted and Nurkum removed, employees turned to witness Harry collapsing to the floor as if he'd been shot. At first, it was thought that he just fainted, but he was attended to immediately. They worked for over 30 minutes trying to revive him, but he never regained consciousness. The company's physician was called to pronounce him dead roughly around 9:30 that morning. It's speculated that his death was instantaneous, as no one saw him move once he collapsed. The coroner confirmed as much upon their autopsy, settling on a verdict of heart disease exacerbated by excitement. As an aside, Nurkum was transported to West Penn, where he died 2 days later at the age of 22. Jacob Kennedy was a 16-year-old boy who made good on a threat to run away from his East End home of Enterprise Street. In April of 1907, he left his family for Bridger, Montana to live with his grandfather. 4 days after he left, his elder brother, John, who was 18, was sent by their mother to bring Jacob back home to Pittsburgh. The brothers both successfully reached their destination in Montana, only to learn that their grandfather had moved to Pittsburgh some time before. Hopping on freight trains, they backtracked east, but were separated in Chicago. John safely returned home in September of 1908, and the family marked Jacob's progress via postcards as he traveled towards Pittsburgh. They estimated his arrival for about September 27th. The day before his expected arrival, his mother received a telegram from an undertaker in Beaver County. J.T. Anderson, a mortician, had the unfortunate task of alerting the family of an accident along the Cleveland and Pittsburgh Railroad, in which Jacob had been involved just 2 days prior. Jacob had been sleeping in a car loaded with steel rails. The load shifted during transit sometime during the night, throwing the rails against him, crushing him. His remains were discovered at a stop in Vanport Township in Beaver County, less than 40 miles from Pittsburgh. He was identified by his family letters, which he kept in his pocket. Mr. Morris had one of the more colorful obituaries I think I've ever read. David E. Morris was a well-known Welsh immigrant who worked as a wood chopper for the steelworks. He lived on the corner of Amity and 9th Avenue as a boarder. A long version of his obituary that appeared in the local news noted his character as, this is all quote now, peculiar. Notwithstanding his liking for strong drink, he often appeared in the role of a temperance orator and also of a religious turn, yet his instability and his volubility gained for him the reputation of a crank. On one occasion, returning from a temperance gathering at 6 Mile Ferry about 2 years ago, he wandered off to the woods and fell into a stone quarry, where he became known as Stone Quarry Dave. This is still a quote from the obituary. He was supposedly delighted by his new nickname, and he often wrote contributions to the local newspapers. They humored him and would publish these. The obituary continued, again a quote, although of little use to the community, he was a harmless man, and much regret is expressed over his untimely end. His untimely end ultimately began on the 4th of July when he was hit by a train in a drunken stupor. The engineer had continuously sounded the whistle and applied the brakes, making note that the man who was walking quite leisurely along the tracks not once paid attention to the signals. He was struck and thrown to the side, somehow surviving. The trainman placed him in the baggage car, and he was taken to West Penn Hospital with a fractured skull and amputated toes. He lived for 5 days in a comatose state before succumbing to his injuries. He was buried within the soldier circle by his fellow members of Post 207, though he had served with Company H in the 27th Ohio Volunteer Infantry in the Civil War. Our final friend for the evening, this was an odd case as well. So Dr. John Osborne had been an English Homestead-based physician who fell ill with a baffling illness that lasted for 3 months. Does anyone want to take a stab at what that would have been?
Pneumonia.
Polio?
You're probably never going to guess this. Hiccups. The final month led to a chronic case of hiccups. He had a severe attack that lasted nearly a week continuously, with only short interruptions from the use of opiates. They stopped temporarily, but resumed on and off throughout the remainder of the month. And unfortunately, I could not find a death certificate that had the initial cause of death. I would have loved to see what that was. But interestingly, his will was filed for probate by John F. Cox. So it was a nice little tie-in back. But the good doctor is in an unmarked grave in the family lot, so you can sort of make out Osborne if you look very, very closely, which these family markers would denote just the lot generally. But we want to hear your stories about the folks that are buried there, because there's only about 12 of us that volunteer at the cemetery. There's over 17,000 people in the cemetery, and a lot of them are in unmarked graves. We don't know everybody who's there, so that's where you come into play. So we want to hear your stories about those who are there. If you have a story that you'd like to share with us, please email us, homesteadcemetery@gmail.com. So we would love to hear more about your friends and family or interesting stories of folks that you know who are buried there. So they might even be featured in a future presentation. So we would love to hear from you. But thank you so much for giving me your attention. So we do have a couple of upcoming events if you feel so inclined to join us. As Rusty mentioned earlier, we are going to be having our chapel dedication on November 9th. It's a Saturday at 10 a.m., so we would love to have any of you join us. We will also be hosting a Wreaths Across America service. The time is still to be announced, but that will be on Saturday, December 14th. So thank you all again. Thank you. Any questions, comments? If you hated it, don't tell me about it. Anybody?
Can you speak anything to the striking steel workers that are buried there, or no?
We have made a partnership with Shannon Forrester. She is the twice great niece of John Morris. Her story is incredible. I cannot do it justice. She has done such a wealth of research. I believe she's actually working on a book that has the whole family story. If you ever have a chance to listen to her, I cannot urge you enough to do so. It is a fascinating story.
And what we do know for certain, he was the first one who was killed in the Battle of Homestead.
We recently, through our Facebook page, I believe it was Mr. Sotek,
Yes.
there was a family member that had commented, but we haven't been able to get in touch with her to learn more about his story. But they're there.
I want to share that John Morris was actually killed out of the second window in
Yes.
the original part of this bunkhouse. And we at the Battle Homestead Foundation really do consider this sacred camp.
Absolutely. It's very surreal to be in this building and know that he's resting within the grounds that we have the stewards of. So it's very surreal.
I heard her story a couple of years ago on the local news, the Homestead Brothers call it. The news, it's not the news anymore, it's the news.
Could you
There's
speak up?
a group of guys that were trying to do an upgrade, for lack of better word, to Cumberland Posey Jr.'s gravestone. Are you aware of that?
That would have been, we've actually been working with, that's the Josh Gibson Foundation. And the Gibson Foundation originally it's run by Josh's grandson. And they've come on financially difficult times until the recent Major League's interest now in the Negro Leagues, which has provided, the Major League Baseball has provided funding. And through that, in our cemetery, we know that they're attempting to put gravestones on players from the Negro League who were in unmarked graves. They just did one last summer for a Sonny Man Jackson. They came, the Josh Gibson Foundation came and they put the stone in for that, and they're still trying to identify other Negro League players who are buried there within unmarked graves. And like I said, that's the Josh Gibson Foundation. And we're fortunate is one of their board members is the gentleman who actually does the baseball tour for us during the history days.
He's extremely knowledgeable.
And he's written several books on the topic. Yes, sir.
You mentioned Sonny Man Jackson.
Yes.
Yeah, he's legendary because Porky Chadwick got his, I think he had jukebox 78 RPM records. And that's where Porky would get his records that he played on air.
Okay.
Do you know where the record shop was located in Homestead?
Is that down near Quarry Playground? The old Whammo building?
Okay.
Is that where, I believe that's where that was at.
Interesting.
If you come up the back,
He's legendary, really.
Yeah.
He's unknown, but he's legendary because Porky, again, started playing black rhythm and blues records that became popular with white kids and became rock and roll.
yeah, it's actually the radio station was right there.
Yeah, we'd love to
No, it's
hear more about
coming up the hill. It's somewhere, I would say, around between 12th and 14th Avenue on the back. I can't remember what the name of the street is, but the one that runs up past them where Eaton Park used to be. If you take that cut off and go up the hill, that's where Hayes is at Hayes Street. So it's somewhere between 12th and 14th Avenue on Hayes Street. There's an old building, it's right on the corner. It was called Whammo, and that's where
And I actually, there was a window where you could actually see Porky play, so on KTV downtown.
Yes.
So, yes, let me introduce Ms. Connie Cordes to you, who is a wonderful friend of Betty Davis for her whole lifetime. And please share a couple of minutes of Betty's story and where she's buried in the cemetery.
Ms. Davis was actually just inurned with us within the past month or so. We didn't know if you were ready for us to share her story yet or not. So, but if you'd like to speak, please, you know her better than I did.
Okay.
No pressure.
So Betty is actually Betty Mabry Davis. She was a musician, songwriter. She grew up in both Durham, North Carolina, and then she moved here with her family. And her father worked in the steel mills, and she lived up on Glen Street in Homestead. We went to church together, and we also corresponded throughout the years. That when she left Pittsburgh to move to New York at the age of 16, she became a model, a singer-songwriter. She married Miles Davis, and she was a good friend of Jimi Hendrix, Sly Stone, Carlos Santana. A lot of musicians back in the day respected Betty for her songwriting and performing. Just one story I'd like to tell about her. She came home one winter after leaving Pittsburgh, and we went to church. Well, Betty was always a fashion icon, and you felt really small standing next to her. And in church that Sunday, she came with a fur coat, high boots, fishnet stockings, and a miniskirt. Needless to say, that was a scandal that Sunday morning. But she came home to Pittsburgh after losing her father, and it really was a jolt to her mental illness. She died February 9th, 2022, just recently. And she suffered from schizophrenia for her adult life, and we didn't talk about it because we wanted to respect her all those years. People thought that she had escaped and she was recluse and didn't want to be bothered. She was just trying to maintain her mental illness. She was just trying to live the best that that she could, the best life that she could. There's a movie out, it's on Netflix. It's called They Say I'm Different, and it talks about her life. She was buried right up here in Homestead Cemetery, and I was just so pleased with we installed a headstone with her picture on it, and she was the Queen of Bunk, and so that is inscribed on the stone. She's overlooking where she grew up, and then she lived the last years of her life at St. Teresa building in Munhall, and she's overlooking the steel mill where her father worked. So if you have a chance to go visit her grave, please do so.
Tell them about her mural down at the Waterman here.
There's a beautiful mural on the side of Barnes and Noble with Josh Gibson and the nice Betty that is sprawled beautifully, reminding me of the days when I would go up to her bedroom after church and we'd get ready to go down to Isley's and her hair was all in place. And I said at her memorial service, she made me want to wear a hat.
Say something for the people who can't visualize what she looked like and how, she walked in
Look
the
her up on
room
your
with
phone.
1,000 people, you would notice her. But who was she, the precursor, or was it like Prince and Madonna, or whoever?
Well, they all, when Betty passed away, they all commented online how much she influenced them.
Wow.
Prince, Beyonce, Madonna, they mentioned her on the Chiron during the Grammys that year.
Wow.
So she was really respected in the industry. And she wrote a song for the Chambers Brothers called Uptown to Harlem. Wonderful song. It's the backdrop for Questlove's Summer of Love documentary. And she wrote the song and she chased them down and said, I have a song for you, I have a song for you. And that song went on to become a hit for the Chambers Brothers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
She's going in. We just weren't ready if she was ready to have her story, but we definitely need to have us sit down and learn some things, because I would love to have her in this. Any other questions?
I wanted to just point out from what I read about after the Battle of Homestead, there was a period of 2 or 3 weeks where the town was shocked by the deaths and had funeral processions from the area, the mill area, to the various places where there would be a service or they were buried. They were quite formal. Many of the people were members of either social or ethnic or religious societies that oftentimes existed so that there could be decent burials and so on. There were amazing processions of hundreds of people.
Thousands. There were thousands.
Thousands of people to the cemetery in recognition of the heroism of these people. So I'm just thinking, are there counterparts today? I wonder, maybe not yet.
I don't know if we have anyone at this point in time that would be that,
No.
yeah. I think that was a special time in history.
Yeah.
And that really, for lack of a better term, ignited something in the area. I don't know if we'll ever see anything like that personally.
Any questions out there?
I don't have a question, just a
want to thank you for the excellent presentation. It's so interesting. Informative.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about the Soldier Circle and? Would anyone like to know about the book that Kira co-authored? Yes, Kira.
So myself and Ellis Michaels, thanks for throwing me under the bus, Kim. So as we mentioned, Ellis Michaels has been replacing all of the illegible veteran stones throughout the cemetery that he's able to find enough supporting documentation for. So he and I collaborated. This is probably almost a 4-year project that we have been slowly researching these soldiers. So we were able to come up with a spread for each of the soldiers within the circle that has a little bit more about them, what battles or military service that they did. Alice did a lot of the research and would kind of send me over bullet point things, and I would kind of put everything together and write it out. So it was definitely a labor of love, but there's some really interesting stories that are in there. It's only $20, so.
As Kira had stated, this was when we took over in 2020 and formed our board, this was the first project that we undertook. And noticed that all the majority of the stones that were in the circle were illegible. You couldn't read them any longer. Kira then got in touch with the Asmonga family, and they were able to provide us with research as to who's buried where. And at that point, that's when Ellis started with making, we went to the VA and asked for, hey, can we get these stones replaced? And the VA told us, we don't go back that far to the Civil War. So, as one of our first missions was to try to generate some money. So I had written a letter to the Gettysburg Foundation out there with the National Civil War, and they put us in touch with this organization called Shrouds of Honor, and they taught us how to make application, and before you know it, we were getting stone after stone after stone that were being sent us. And again, talking like we are here with this, our first partnership that we formed was with the Veterans Organization from U.S. Steel. And they were the ones that came and they helped us dig the stones, pull the old ones out, put some of the new ones in. So, that's been an ongoing process. And it was last Memorial Day that we were finally able to rededicate it because we had finished replacing all of the stones in the circle.
To give you an idea, this is what we started with. So how do you even begin? It took forever to find out, and I believe John and Linda combed through tons of newspapers for over, I think, about a 60-year period, just trying to match up names. And the ledgers that we have, our records are not good. There was not much left from back then, because even the first superintendents and the people taking charge they didn't write stuff down. Stuff that they did write down was not spelled correctly, or the dates were weird. It took a lot of piecing things together, and we're very thankful for 4 people in the audience.
In the back there, you might want to stand up. These are our partners from the University of Pittsburgh. Their mission, since they decided to accept it, is to try to help us make some sense out of the records. As Kara was saying, Christine, one of our volunteers, she has done yeoman's work in trying to digitize our records and be able to come up and place the records. She's embarked on a process where she's photographing all the stones in the cemetery. There's another group from the University of Pittsburgh that's going to assist her in finishing that project of photographing all the stones. Like, as we were telling our friends from Pitt today, I always cringe when Christine goes to work.
We'll get many texts.
Many texts.
And just expletives.
And I'm a 9 o'clock bed person. And Christine tends to go down about 10:30 at night. And my phone just starts going ding, 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 ding. And oh God, what did Christine find now? And but she has been a godsend to the cemetery and everything that she's done to help us identify who's
She's not here.
She's not here tonight, but these young folks from Pitt are going to help her in that process. Yes, ma'am.
On behalf of the program committee for the Ballard Homestead Foundation, I want to thank you so much, not just for your beautiful presentation, but for this work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
So important for historical purposes, for moral purposes, for all sorts of good things to make the world a better place.
Thank you.
Thank you. Volunteers and board members more than welcome.
Yeah, are you still interested in doing a little tour for any members that we might be able to gather?
Sure.
We could do that, yes, and I would have to say, like we originally had planned to do it the next day, I would think that we probably would want to put that at a different time, because we're supposed to get some bad weather tomorrow. But if you would, if you had a group of people who would like to do that, all you need to do is contact us, and we can set up a time, and we can do that for you.
Thank you.
Be more than happy to show you that, and we're awful proud of the work that we've done in the refurbishing of the old caretaker's house.
Thank you.
Before you all leave, just a plug for one of the slides that Kira mentioned was, we do want to hear your stories. Very recently, there was a cleanup day, and we were out and we were picking up trash along the side, and a couple of us just went over and said hello. We went over and said hello to some family, some folks who were visiting or, paying, they were just kind of at a stone, and they were paying tribute to a family member. And we went over and asked them for their, what their family story was. Oh, it's just my pap. He doesn't really have a story, he says. And we're like, well, everyone has a story. And so we started asking, well, was he a veteran? I'm not sure. Well, where did he work? Did he work in the snow mills? I'm not sure. And we just started asking a bunch of questions, and the gentleman kind of stood back and said, he was a veteran. Yeah, he was a veteran. And I said, well, what's his name? So we went over and we found out that he was a veteran. We took his name, wrote his name down. Alice confirmed it. We ended up giving him a marker on site. The young man was able to put a marker on his grandfather's stone. It was an emotional moment. I teared up. I think Kira teared up. I think everybody there teared up. And it was a moment for his family that they didn't get a chance to do years back. So, we do want to hear from you. So I do have business cards in case you didn't get a chance to write down. So take a card and please email us. We've met folks who've come through that said, I grew up here. There's a family that has, the woman we met recently who has
128 family members.
She has over 100 family members. She had 10, how'd it go? Mom and dad, mom was one of 10. They had 10, who had 10, who had 10 more. And you know how it goes, right? And so there's 120. You do the math. But there's a story, and they're all around. And so we said, if you can make it back, we'll do the research. We'll put a marker out. We want to know your story, and we want to help you. So we know those stories are out there. We want to help you find them, and that's why we're here. I think that's why we come back day after day. That's why Rusty answers the phone and says, Kira, are you available? I'm working. Kim, are you available? Yeah, I work from home. I'm half mile away. Actually, I'm not even that far, so down there. If we meet people outside the door. So we're here, we're volunteers, but we're very reliable. We want your story. So.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.